I am Solomon Choi. I'm the founder and former CEO of 16 Handles. For those of you who have not lived or worked or visited New York City, you're probably like, what is that? That's the logo there, so it kind of gives it away. But we are New York City's first self-serve frozen yogurt shop. And I started that business in 2008. I want to kind of give a little bit of background about how I got there. I think that's very apropos to really this understanding of so why did I focus so much on the customer journey and the guest experience? My background has only been in hospitality as an adult. My first job out of college was with Enterprise Rent-A-Car in their management training program. Enterprise is the number one rental car company in terms of market share, also in terms of customer service every year by way of J.D. Power and Associates. And so I got a chance to, like I said, really learn from them how they do things differently, make it convenient for the customer, and lead with this idea that customer experience is everything. The promotability in that company, for those of you who don't know, it's two things. I still remember this from 2002. It's the ESQI score, which is the Enterprise Service Quotient Index, and that had everything to do with if you ever rent a car from there, they will follow up with a phone call and ask you how satisfied you were with your rental experience. And as low tech as that was our way of being able to understand, did you perform? The only passing grade, it was pass-fail, was completely satisfied. And that was very difficult to do when they gave you 4 options on the phone. And so I'd have to tell every single renter, were you completely satisfied with your rental? And so just this idea of really staying committed to somebody's complete satisfaction was something that Enterprise taught me. My father, who was a multi-unit franchisee, if you didn't live in the California area, you maybe not know what Todai is. Todai was the first self-serve seafood buffet franchise. Started in California in 1985. My father became a franchisee in 1997 because it's a place that our family went to every holiday and birthday. Todai's unique selling proposition was it was the only franchise that was open 365 days a year, and a place that you can go in without a last-minute reservation because it was massive. And so it was really, I think, also kind of one of the brands that started this idea of sushi, right? 1985, most of us probably weren't eating sushi. Some of us probably weren't even alive then. I got into sushi as a result of Todai. And so again, this was something near and dear to our family. What I learned from working for my father at Todai was also, again, this idea of how do you take something that is a buffet setting and increase customer service. The convenience piece was there. I mean, we had over 200 dishes. You had everything from hot foods, cooked foods, soups, desserts, and sushi. And the sushi piece was, I think, the discovery piece for a lot of people. And it was for a lot of people who I've talked to, their first time being introduced to that. But it was a turnaround situation. My father had owned a location in San Diego and essentially said, hey, we have all these kind of lower tier, cheaper buffets opening up. You seem to be doing pretty well at Enterprise. You understand marketing. Can you come help me? And so I did, turned it around, specifically with 2 things. And again, it was this idea that how do we raise customer service? These servers hated working there because unlike their counterparts that were working in casual and fine dining restaurants in San Diego's Mission Valley and Hotel Circle area, they felt that they were physically working harder but not being tipped well, right? So if the industry average was somewhere around 15%, I asked them, I was like, how much are you guys getting in tips? And they were like 8%, but we're working harder. So I was like, well, let's up the service, did that. And within 6 months, they were averaging 13, 14%. So then I became this hero, oh my gosh, this guy knows how to do this. Turned the restaurant around, we sold it, exited. I then got to spend 6 months living in Beijing, China, where I learned Mandarin and China business, thinking that my next startup was going to be in China. I'm not Chinese, I'm South Korean. Figured out in day one that unless you're a national, you can't start a business there unless you have a partner who is and owns more than 50%. So after 6 months, I came back and joined a startup hospitality group, helped open up other Japanese restaurants. And in doing so, there was a transition where the CEO of the company that I was with ended up buying the rights to a Texas-based gelato franchise and asked me to do franchise development. So I got to learn and be paid to do franchise development. And so kind of along that hospitality journey, I say all this because this ultimately led to then me coming upon America's Cup frozen yogurt. This was in 2007. And with America's Cup, America's Cup is the very first self-serve pay-by-weight frozen yogurt shop. So this, it was started in 1988. Family friend bought it in 1990. They still operate it today. It's kind of the American dream story. South Korean immigrants that came, put 3 kids through college, and still operate a small business today. I met Mr. Song, said, you need to show me the keys to the kingdom. How does this business work? first what I actually tried to pitch to him was, can I do franchise development for you? I know how to do that now. He said, absolutely not. I said, well, I'm going to copy this operating model, so can you just teach me from the inside out, and I won't open up a store near you. And so we agreed on that, which is why from Southern California came New York. This is interesting because Howard Schultz was someone that I still look up to now. We all probably know who he is from the industry, but in case you don't, you've been living under a rock. He is the founder and now chairman of Starbucks. Something that he said was, whatever you do, don't play it safe. Don't do things the way they've always been done. Don't try to fit the system. If you do what's expected of you, you'll never accomplish more than others expect. And so this really stuck with me. Interestingly enough, Howard Schultz's VC, Maverick Capital, invested into my largest competitor back in 2007 called Pinkberry, which many of you have probably heard of. He invested $27.5 million into Pinkberry for national expansion by way of franchising. Pinkberry started in LA. Their next big market was New York City. That's where most of that money was going to fund. That was in October of 2007. I decided to move to New York City in March of 2008 to start 16 Handles. And I looked at this as an opportunity where I have a unique opportunity to build a brand and to be able to scale it with the franchise model that I learned. So the only investment that I took before I sold the company in 2022 was from family to open up my first location in New York City's East Village, which turns 15 next month. And for those of you who've been living in the U.S., you probably have a version of this in your home market. This idea of self-serve froyo, and sure, froyo was a fad. In 2008 to 2012, you opened up a store, you were making money even if you didn't know what you were doing. A pretty easy operating model. So that in and of itself wasn't the why. For me, yes, I wanted to have that first mover advantage in a market like New York City, right? Media capital, highly influential when it comes to consumer trends, early adopter of all things kind of new and interesting. And that's why I moved to New York City. I didn't know that I was going to kind of run into this subprime mortgage crisis and these other kind of, other market conditions that were outside of my control. But one of the things that I noticed that a lot of my competitors were doing at the time was really they were promoting things like, oh, froyo is healthy for you, and we have the best tasting this, that, our tartan's better. And I was just kind of like, I don't know if that's really that's really defendable. What I saw at a moment where kind of market conditions were down, I had access to overqualified labor, so that was really nice. I felt that this model could be built where we have a low labor model, take small footprint stores, right? Our leases of our stores were 300 to 1,500 square feet, non-vented, which was great for New York City. If anyone's opened up restaurants in New York City, that's always a tough challenge, is finding and competing for vented spaces. Average startup cost of $250,000 to $500,000, so relatively low to get into a QSR. And at the time, with our first few locations, we were doing over $1 million in our units, and so we already had the proof of concept proven. The motto for 16 Handles was this: it was to create moments of happiness by sharing the world's best tasting desserts and snacks centered around quality, self-expression, and fun. And so those three words at the end there were really what I wanted to focus and build kind of our pillars around, right? I felt that if we can own those concepts, that has nothing to do with being a fad, has nothing to do about being self-serve necessarily, but has everything to do with this consumer behavior. And for me, when I was starting 16 Handles and having worked at America's Cup Yogurt, I realized like that target consumer was really the millennial female. And myself, I think I'm a late Gen Xer. Right? And so even though I moved to New York City, I was in my mid-20s, I didn't have social media, like that was something that I had to learn. And more importantly, I was not a millennial female. And so to me, it was like doing a lot of research, and the first location was by NYU University, and specifically by the freshman dorm. And so I got to kind of learn like what kind of compelled her, and how she communicated, and the different trends that were appealing to her. And I thought that was really, I think, the competitive advantage that I had, was really this insight and access into like what drives and motivates her. And this not only helped me find my wife eventually, but it really allowed me to connect with the customer in a way where I was like, I don't really know what you like, but can you tell me, right? And she was very open to sharing what that was. And so I was very blessed for that. The growth of the brand really came from focusing on these three things, right? So it was customization through self-serve. Again, first mover advantage in a market like New York City, that's certainly an advantage there. Community through dietary celebrations for all. The dietary celebrations piece was something that I think that unlock was, again, from a brand standpoint, super important, and one that we at the support center really fostered the development of, because before it'd be like, okay, like what's your dietary restriction? We kind of have something for all dietary restrictions. For us, we're like, why do people come to 16 Handles? And for us, it was it's a celebration. But if we can build community around that and capture that feeling, we felt that we had a longevity that, transcended, again, a froyo fad, so to speak. And then the third thing, which I think very apropos for why maybe most of you are here, and something that we were committed to, was being digitally driven for the next generation consumer. So as I mentioned, I grew up in Southern California. I grew up with 31 flavors Baskin Robbins. That's the name 16. I wanted to own a number because I just know how much of a mark that left on me in my childhood. And while everyone was kind of like focusing on a color and a fruit and things of that nature, I was just kind of like, that's not really what we're selling. What we're selling is kind of choices, it's happiness, it's customization. And that's one thing that I will say that a lot of the ad agencies that ended up pitching me, they're like, who did you work with to come up with that name? And I'm like, I actually thought of it myself. And they're like, wow, that's amazing. I was like, okay, I did something right, so that's good. Really interesting. So for those who came to the DEI panel yesterday, even though he technically was a mentor early on, he probably could have used some DEI training. But John Schnatter, for those of you who know, founder of Papa John's, I ended up winning this Sprint business fantasy camp, and this was in early 2009. So I'd been in business for a few months, and I applied for this contest where, again, they would essentially pair you up with a mentor in the industry who had done what it is that you're looking for. And so for me, it was around technology. It was how do I use and leverage technology to be able to connect with my guests? And here I am now, 15 years later talking about that. But I got paired with John Schnatter, got to go to his corporate office, and really I share this, and I found this on YouTube. It's really funny. I was like looking for content. I'm like, is this even on YouTube? It's on YouTube. So if you look it up, I think you'll have a laugh. But what he said was absolutely true, and I think fundamental for the way that I looked at approaching both digital innovation and technology for my brand. I looked at it through the lens of how is this going to improve her experience, right? So you hear me say that a lot, and the reason I say her is not to alienate the he's and he, him, her, she pronouns, but it was very much like I knew who my customer base was, right? Even on social media, it was 80% of our users were female. You go into the stores, you certainly see that. And so to me, it was like, okay, if I have to be very narrow in terms of I want to make these decisions based on what's best for her and what she's going to prefer, then hopefully she'll stay loyal to me. And so assess the situation. That's what I did. Be efficient with your technology choices. And I'll kind of just go right into the next slide because I think with that, at the time, again, this was 2008, 2009, really the start of social media. If you were a social media manager in 2008, then I think you were a charlatan because I don't think most businesses even knew what that was. But for us, we saw this, and we saw that specifically when I talked to that NYU consumer, right, that college female, she was commuting by way of Twitter, Facebook, and I got a call, I remember, from the head of BD at Foursquare. This was in 2008, true story, really funny. I didn't even know what Foursquare was, and he's like, hey, congratulations, you're one of the most checked in places on our platform, and we want to, and I was like, hey, I'm not paying for your service. He goes, no, not looking for payment. We want to actually promote this. Can we send you stickers and swag to be able to promote more of this? And I was like, well, what do you guys do? And so that's when I really understood that this idea of kind of user-generated content and sharing using mobile technology and social media to be able to do that, I was like, okay, there's something there. Even with Facebook, I had to get one of the students, I think one of my cashiers, to help me set up the first Facebook account on for 16 Handles. And something that really stood out there was the polling feature, right? So with 16 Handles, we have 16 rotating flavors, and every week I would rotate 1 or 2 flavors, and I was like, how do I get the guest involved, right? And then when I realized this was every time I do a flavor change, again, one of the she's would be like, oh, you took away my flavor. And it's like, oh, well, why don't you try this one? It's like, no, I came here for the pistachio. By the way, pistachio, I just want to point out, pistachio fans are super, super intense. They're very passionate about it. I've had many, many customers walk out of my door because I didn't have the pistachio. Yeah, never a top 10 seller, but oh my goodness, did it either make someone's day or do the opposite. But with that, I was like, why am I guessing when I have access now to, I think at the time we had 300 followers. But if you remember Facebook in 2008 and 2009, any message you put out went to all 300 people. It was amazing. And so this idea of two-way dialogue that I didn't necessarily have to pay for was a huge unlock for me. The polling was amazing. Something that I did was I was like, wait, what if I ask them what they want to see? The playbook that I take from Rev, whenever he goes to a conference, he says, what shirt do you want to see? But he plans on bringing all those shirts. So, Oh, sorry. But it was that. It was, I have access to these new flavors, but like, why don't I get her involved? And, when something would win, it'd be like, hey, congratulations, Tuesday, 2 o'clock, we're gonna do the flavor change, and boom, we'd see the spike in sales. And so to me, it was more, the why we did it was, yes, get the guests involved, but what it actually did was it made her feel empowered that, hey, this brand's listening to me and listening to my needs. And it also made it feel like someone behind the scenes or behind that machine is not just like, sporadically like changing flavors on the whim. There's a reason for it. And it's like, oh, okay, well, the community voted on it. And so to me, that was my foray of also understanding, hey, there's a way to be able to connect with community and empower them to be able to help you make good business decisions, which is ultimately doing what? Improving her experience. Like, she's giving you the answer. To me, I was like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. Yelp was also great. As a matter of fact, funny story there with Yelp. With 16 handles, so for those who've been to a soft serve shop, usually those machines are equipped with 3 handles, actually. There's like a middle twist handle. And so when I first opened up, I remember, we had 8 machines, 16 handles, 16 flavors, and one of the earliest Yelp reviews we got, this guy's like, hey, I went to 16 handles, but they actually have 24 handles. Oh my gosh, how are you trying to be an authentic brand when the community's already calling you a fraud? And so the next day I went and I removed the middle handle. Now that actually ended up being a great decision because for one, now if they want to try both, you gotta get both flavors, you gotta commit. But more importantly, again, it was more about this idea of like, let the community speak and help foster the development of your brand and what it is that your brand's delivering on. So to me, again, something as small as like, well, if your name is that, like, shouldn't you deliver that? I thought that was very basic, but again, it's something that helped me drive business decisions based on what the community wanted and said. One of the notable things was I did hire someone to do digital marketing and communications in 2009. Like I said, there were no job ads for social media manager necessarily, but this individual was actually one of the early Twitter influencers. So he loved Twitter, and so he created a campaign. It was called Snappy New Year. So I remember for New Year's Day, which again, the stakes were very low, because in the Northeast, we don't sell that much Froyo. People aren't lining up when it's snowing outside. But he created this campaign, and it was essentially like using the Snapchat platform to be able to create a discount that then when somebody was in the store and before they went to pay would send the snap, he would then manually send them a discount, and they'd be able to show that to the cashier, and it'd disappear in 10 seconds. And so I was like, okay, that's cool. Got a real, pretty good level of engagement for something like that, especially on New Year's Day when we're pretty slow. And so I was like, oh, that's interesting. And we were recognized for that. And if you Google it, you'll maybe read an article that says 16 Handles was the first brand in the world to use Snapchat. To me, it was, again, more of this idea of, hey, like, how do we commit to the things and the tools that the community is going to actually use? And it wasn't about, me being, like Nostradamus for like, oh, I knew what these things were going to be. And that mentality, kind of similar to what Howard Schultz had said, was something that stuck and resonated with me, was don't be afraid to be first, right? Especially if you're going in with the attention that this is going to improve her experience. You're going to be given grace and forgiveness, and it can't just be tactile where it's like, okay, we're only going to go for the ones that we think are going to be right. I think the why needs to be like, if this improves her experience and it makes her happier, then that's a good enough reason to try. So this actually took out of, I went through the old franchise manuals and I found this, and I thought that this was interesting because I think what also helped propel our franchise development and growth, I didn't do trade shows, I didn't have the budget for that, was very much this idea that, hey, we're in New York City, we have access to a lot of this digital innovation, we have access to media, right, which is based in that city, and so with that, like, how can we do this? And so these are just some of the vendors and service providers we worked with. My first store in East Village was kind of a traditional frozen yogurt shop. I realized after going to places like Vegas and seeing kind of these amazing digital LCD screens that, and this was again before Instagram, but I would see like the rotating, the video of the food and like information on pricing. I was like, oh, why don't I do something like that? Especially at a time when I saw most of the customers who came into our stores were using what? Their smartphones, by way of checking in on Foursquare, taking pictures and sharing on Facebook. And so I was like, well, why don't we put a little screen above each flavor? Right? Wouldn't that improve it? The other reason I did that was she was constantly asking, hey, how many calories are in this one? Or hey, what's the ingredients in this? Or hey, like I have this allergy, like do you know if this has it? And I was like, wow, that's a huge strain on a low labor model, right? Where I had a lot of seasonal staff and I couldn't possibly ask them, to know the nutritionals and the ingredient statements of like rotating flavors all the time. And so I thought, hey, this technology tool of LCD screen, something she's used to seeing, and just kind of created a more fluid experience. And, Groupon, Tactile. This is a story I want to share. So Tactile, because this I think highlights the idea that being first doesn't come without its risks. So Tactile was a company that, what was this, like 2010 or 11? And we had just transitioned from paper stamp cards, right? The 1.0 analog, loyalty card, get 8 stamps, get your 9th one free, something like that. And I realized, I was like, this is good for her, but this is one way. This is one way good. I have no idea who she is. And I also knew that if her friend was working as a cashier, then all of a sudden, like, she became a VIP customer. And so I was like, there's got to be a better way to do this. And at a time when I was trying to collect more emails and, again, grow my user base, Tactile really offered this solution, knowing that mobile penetration and smartphone penetration was really high in New York City. And he was like, hey, we're looking for our first franchise case study. And what we do is we put this white cube, like, at your point of sale. And when they go near it, right, using RFID technology, they'll get a check-in. So if they're outside your door, they can't just come in. And so the whole kind of scamming it and getting extra stamps, it alleviated some of that. But more importantly, it gave me access now by way of text and or by email to be able to have that connection with the guests. And so I was like, OK, that's amazing technology. Well, at the time, I think I had 12 locations. Just being able to convert from paper to something as tech forward as this was like a huge lift, right? I had some stores that were pushing back, being like, no, like, we have all these cards, and you're asking our employees to, like, teach something that's new. We don't get it, but we did. And then within a few months, I got notification from the founder, and he was like, hey, I have good news and bad news. Good news is we're getting acquired by Facebook. I was like, amazing, that's so cool, that's great. He goes, yeah, and a lot of that had to do with you. You were our first franchise case study. I was like, what's the bad news? He's like, they're going to shut it down in 90 days, so you probably want to find another solution provider. And I was like, oh my gosh, are you serious? And so again, some of the risk of being first and early is you run into those types of situations. However, it would only be a tragedy if it ended with that. It also taught me, though, that this idea of owning your data was important. Because he was like, hey, well, what you can do is every day, like, why don't you, like, export this into a CSV file, and that way, I'm like, really? Like, you're not going to just give me that? And he's like, well, we don't need to. And so I was like, OK, so the next time I sign on, I want to make sure that I have some of this carve-out or some language in there that protects me from a situation like this. And we moved from that. I was the first chain to then work with a company called Level Up, which some of you may have been familiar with. And the reason I brought up Tactile and shift the story to Level Up is if you've used Level Up, you know why there's a white cube? Right? So that was one of the things. When they started, they had these Android phones that they would, like, put out in front. And I'm like, 80% of our customers are iPhone users in the New York City market. You're asking me to take an Android phone. I don't care if it's free. You're asking me to take an Android phone, put it in front of my register so that way they can do a QR. I was like, that's ugly and that's weird. She's not going to like that, right? Again, it was like, she's not going to like that. That's weird. And so I was like, here's what you should do. Like, this other company I used had this, like, pretty white cube, right? Very Apple-esque. And so anyway, they took my advice and did that. So I will take credit for that. But again, using this idea of mobile, QR code based, and what Level Up did, which I thought was a level up for our industry, was at a time when Starbucks and some of these much larger enterprise brands were creating their loyalty apps, right? Mobile apps. Oh, how do you have a mobile app? Well, if you have $150,000 to $300,000, you can create your own. As a small bootstrap franchise, we didn't have that in our budget, and so that was really, I think, the shift from being like a payments solution provider to more of like, hey, can you create a mobile app for us? And it's like, well, you're not the only one asking for this. And so the mobile app piece became something that then became accessible to us. So now we get to have a mobile app. Great. Fast forward, and you're not going to see this here on this calendar because this franchise brochure was clearly only up until 2015. But then, with the acquisition of the acquisition of Level Up from Grubhub, and seeing that delivery was being a growing channel, I think another advantage about being in New York City was we've been on the delivery platforms since 2010. Meaning, operationally, I figured out how to deliver this product to her since 2010. And that came by way of, that was my second winter, and I remember I was still working in the East Village store, and in the winters I'd get phone calls and be like, hey, like, do you deliver? I'd be like, well, no, we're a self-serve shop. She's like, well, but I don't want to come out, it's too cold. I'd be like, yeah, but we're a self-serve shop. You say that enough times when, during the winter, and you're like, wait, I got to find a solution for her. And so we were early in being able to join those platforms and operationally figured out a way to be able to deliver it to her. And I think that was a huge advantage, which paid itself in spades in 2020 when a lot of my competitors never focused on off-premise that were, it's like self-serve and, froyo, like why would you deliver that? I met Nabil, who's the founder of Lunchbox when it was still in stealth, and he was using it at his company Bear Burger, where he was the CMO. And we met at a conference similar to this. We were in Mexico, and on the way back, when we were at the airport, we were at like a Margaritaville type of a place. And after a few margaritas, he's like, "Hey, you're on Toast, right? I think you were one of the first customers on Toast in New York." And I was like, "We were." And he was like, "Well, and you're on Level Up, right?" And I was like, "Yes." Well, I have a solution that's going to be able to replace that. And so in addition to having the app and this, that, and the other, he's like, well, what if your customers can order directly from your mobile app? I was like, I've been telling Level Up to allow me to do this, And so once again, finding a solution that was better for her, and then finding a solution provider that was able to deliver on that, or working on delivering on that. Some of these other logos here, again, like they were essentially solutions to help us better operationalize our business, to be able to create more convenience for her. And I think while she may not have known behind the scenes that we were doing this, it was this evolution and this constant need to figure out like what's one extra way we can do this, like what's another way we can continue improving. And I think it's more of that. If anything, the takeaway here for me would be like, if you have that mindset for who your core customer is, I don't think you can lose. You might get it wrong and pick the wrong vendor or change, or your vendor might get acquired. But I think that level of commitment to the customer, I mean, this is a CX journey, I think that's what it is. Andy or somebody had mentioned this morning, not just implementing tech and digital solutions for the sake of doing it, but the why, I think, is the most important thing. And I think that'll also get you a lot more grace when you do get it wrong. And I think that's the takeaway there. The collaborations, and this was a quick snapshot of the last kind of spring and summer collaborations before my exit. But what I realized during the pandemic, when, again, if you think about it, in 2020, I'm primarily based in the Northeast. The Northeast was the first to be hit. If you guys don't remember, New Rochelle, New York was the first market to actually be quarantined. We have a store there. We have a franchisee there. And so it really hit home. At that time, we had to figure out, like, wait, pandemic, socially distanced, don't touch things, wear a mask, spray everything down. We were probably all doing that. I mean, I remember like spraying down Amazon packages that were cardboard where you couldn't even transmit the virus. But we were all in that mode, right? It was like, oh my gosh, what's going on? And so I remember the webinar that we had with our franchisees in 2020, and specifically the New Rochelle franchisees saying, we're done. Our business is done. Our business model will never work. He goes, I know this. Why? I'm in New Rochelle. They literally shut down all the streets. We can't go and buy anything. Who's ever going to come into our store? And I was like, I'm pretty sure this is a global pandemic and not just the New York City or 16 Handles pandemic. But with that, I realized that, yes, I think in the near term, this is going to be a huge inconvenience for us because we have extra hurdles we need to overcome because of our business format, right? I'm sure the last place you were thinking of going into were like buffets and places where you had to like touch things and be right next to people. And so with that, I thought, well, what we have, though, is a unique opportunity because our form factor of soft serve is something that when people order that, it's for immediate consumption. And unlike, let's say like a hard-packed or a hard-scooped ice cream place where if you were to go to a grocery store and buy, your Ben & Jerry's, your Haagen-Dazs, or whatever pint you like, typically you're buying that in addition to other grocery items. And when you go home, what's the natural behavior? You put it in the freezer, right, for later. And hopefully you remember, and if you remember that night, maybe you'll eat some after dinner. Typically not eating the whole pint, but maybe some of you do, no judgment. But again, it's a behavior for later, right? But when you're getting soft serve, because of the form factor, it's melting, it's for immediate consumption. And so I think it was a safe bet to think like when people are ordering for delivery and they're receiving it, it's for immediate consumption. So I thought like, we have a really unique opportunity here because we're technically an omni-channel brand here that has maybe not direct-to-consumer by way of shipping, but direct-to-consumer by way of delivery. And we have a high degree of likelihood that she's going to consume that as soon as she gets it or very soon after she receives it. Why? Because she's afraid it's going to melt. And so that's really interesting. How can that help other brands? And a brand that we had a collaboration with that we launched in New York City, and now you can probably find in a lot of places, was a company, Oatly. And so Oatly, I remember this in 2019, one of the last food shows I went to was Expo East in the fall of 2019, and I saw that they were trying to launch pints, frozen pints. So in the back of my mind, I knew, hey, you know what? Oatly's trying to do frozen. Okay, cool. They align with Starbucks, and if you remember, there was like a huge shortage in the country. You couldn't get Oatly into your coffee at Starbucks. And so I was like, you know what? There's this pent-up demand. There's this natural progression towards plant-based, and specifically with oat milk, Oatly was the brand. And so I was like, you know what? Had my team do some research. The president of Oatly US lives in the Upper West Side in New York. Let's reach out to him. We positioned 16 Handles to be essentially his retailer. I'm like, there's no sampling going on. All the CPG brands, unless you were selling hand wipes or toilet paper, like you weren't really that relevant in a grocery setting, especially in 2020. And so I remember telling him, I was like, well, what if we can be kind of your omni-channel distribution partner? And so I was able to leverage that, became the hero to the franchisees. But ultimately, all that was because, again, like, in using what we had to our advantage, which was we have these digital solutions, and we have this connection with our customer. So like that kind of changed the game for us and allowed us to open up doors with, again, what else is New York City known for? Broadway, right? And with fall programming, we had learned this because we've been doing delivery since 2010, that we would see an uptick for fall programming, right? I mean, this idea of like Netflix and chill, like we were super relevant with that, right? Literally and figuratively. And so we started looking at like, TV programming at a time when, again, it'd be like, oh, well, she's gonna stay home. She's not coming into a self-serve location. Well, let's bring it to her then. So I remember even just doing certain things like social posts and email blasts during that time for programming without discount, we'd see an uptick in sales. So to me, that also showed that we didn't need to drive through couponing, but just, again, be relevant when she wants you, right? When it was like season finale of like Bachelor, oh my gosh, sales through the roof, like stuff like that, where like she would have like viewing parties. And so the reason I put these three icons here is the other thing too, again, as I mentioned, we were very early on with third-party delivery, and they essentially got us out there and kind of proved to the customer and proved to her that, hey, we are a viable business. I think had we done that with 1P only, a lot of people that I've talked to, that I still talk to now, it's like, but doesn't it melt? Like there's this kind of fear that needed to be overcome, but by being on these platforms for over a decade, it helped quell some of that and also created more trial. So I think that for us, that was also another thing where it's like, hey, how do we be convenient for her? So now like the playbook. What you see up here, so Danny Duncan and Neil Hirschman, they are the owners of 16 Handles. And what I didn't mention was, so from 2008 to 2022, I completely bootstrapped the company. I took a $600,000 investment from family to open up my first store in East Village, and the rest was through organic growth and reinvesting into the company. And Neil Hirschman, young guy, was my franchisee, multi-unit franchisee. I convinced him to open up in Times Square during the pandemic. He saw this opportunity where he was like, hey, you know what? Like, we don't have any more competitors. We now have these like brand collaborations. This thing should be a national brand. And so he paired up, and his secret weapon was he got a YouTuber that has the Gen Z crowd. I set out to start 16 Handles to create the next generation frozen dessert concept for the millennial female. The next generation after that being Gen Z. Danny Duncan does $50 million a year in merch sales, primarily with Gen Z. To me, like, this was a match made in heaven. They were both 27 years old. I was 27 when I started 16 Handles. To me, like, there was just all these parallels where I'm like, you know what? Now's the time to hand this off to the next gen of ownership as well. And so like that playbook, I think, is something that allowed us to stay true to, again, building community by focusing on her and getting her involved with decision making. The convenience factor, which is going to allow for digital innovation and the tools that are available, a lot of them here today. And then through collaboration, both with like literally like, influencers in the space and creators who are relevant, but then also with brands. And I think looking at brands as creators as well, I think the combination of those things were a playbook that, I wish Danny and Neil the best, and hopefully it'll be a national brand. And so that's the journey there. And I think with that, hopefully there were some takeaways here, but I think the commitment to digital innovation, and because you want to create the best customer journey for your customer, I think is the biggest takeaway here, and something that worked for me. I think you could argue that anyone could have gotten lucky during a fad, but I started in 2008, moved to New York City, sold in 2022, didn't take outside investment. That didn't happen because of luck or luck only. It happened because of that commitment. And so thank you for listening to my journey and story. Appreciate it.